Before we go anywhere, let me say this quietly. If you're watching this, it's not because you missed something obvious, it's because you sensed something and didn't yet have the language for it. There's a specific type of man who ends up here. Men who observe before they act, men who don't force moments, men who stay silent, not out of fear, but because they're reading the room more deeply than anyone realizes. And that's exactly why this situation feels confusing. Because, on the surface, it looks like friendship, but underneath it, something doesn't line up. She laughs too easily around you, finds reasons to be close, touches your arm like it's accidental, except it happens again and again. You tell yourself, if she wanted more, she'd say it. That belief feels logical, comforting, and incomplete. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people never explain. Some women don't pull away when they're not interested, they lean in harder when they're waiting. And that waiting creates tension, not dramatic tension, psychological tension, the kind that makes you question yourself while she's quietly questioning why you haven't moved yet. So let's start at the first signal, the one most men notice but dismiss too quickly. One, expressive facial expressions. Watch her face. Not her words, not her tone, her face. Now, when a woman feels anticipation and it isn't being met, her expressions leak it. Her eyes widen slightly when you say something confident. Her eyebrows lift just a fraction longer than necessary. There's a pause after you speak, as if she's waiting for something else to follow. Sometimes she bites her lip, sometimes she exhales through a half smile that fades too fast. These aren't random, they're involuntary. And here's the part that shifts perspective. Those expressions don't mean she's unsure. They mean she's surprised you haven't acted on what she assumed you already noticed. Men who stay quiet often misread this as friendliness, but friendliness doesn't come with held eye contact that lingers 1 second too long. Friendliness doesn't look like anticipation that goes unanswered. That subtle flash of disappointment you think you imagined, you didn't. She's not broadcasting attraction. She's reacting to the absence of your response. And once you understand that, you start seeing patterns instead of moments. But facial expressions are only the first crack in the surface. The next sign is more deliberate and far harder to ignore once you recognize what it's really doing. There's a point where interest stops being accidental. It becomes engineered. Men who notice patterns instead of reacting emotionally usually miss this. Not because it isn't obvious, but because it doesn't look the way movies taught you it would. This is where the second sign appears, two, inviting or suggesting one-on-one time. Listen carefully to how she frames time with you. Not group plans, not casual hangouts that happen to include others, just you and her. I heard about this movie playing this weekend. Want to go together? I'm craving sushi. Want to grab dinner? We should check that place out sometime. Just us. On the surface, it sounds harmless, easy, low pressure, but psychologically, this is not neutral behavior. This is her creating a container, a private setting where something could happen if you chose to let it. And here's the perspective shift most men never consider. She already took her step. Women who aren't interested don't isolate time, they diffuse it. They keep things safely social. But when she repeatedly proposes one-on-one moments, she's not asking for company, she's testing whether you recognize the opening, and when you don't take it, she doesn't immediately pull away, she tries again. Different activity, same structure, because part of her believes you're being cautious, another part wonders if you're oblivious, and a quieter part, one she doesn't want to listen to, starts asking whether you see her at all. This creates a strange emotional imbalance. She feels exposed without having confessed anything. You feel comfortable without realizing you're standing in a doorway. Men who don't rush intimacy often think they're being respectful here, and they are. But respect without awareness turns into hesitation, and hesitation over time reads as disinterest, not rejection, disinterest. And that distinction matters more than you think. Because once that question enters her mind, why hasn't he made a move yet? Her behavior begins to change subtly, quietly, but unmistakably. That shift is the third sign, and it's the one that confuses men the most because it doesn't feel positive or negative. It feels off, And that discomfort, that's not a problem. That's information. This is where most men start doubting themselves because nothing bad is happening, but something is different. And people who rely on logic more than intuition often ignore this phase, even though it's one of the loudest signals there is. 3. Altered behavior around you. Interest, when unacknowledged, doesn't disappear, it mutates. You may notice she asks about your plans more often, casually, almost offhand. What are you doing this weekend? Are you seeing anyone lately? You're always so busy. I'm surprised you haven't asked me out for coffee yet. She laughs when she says it, keeps it light, but listen to the wording. Those aren't jokes. They're probes. She's pressing gently against a boundary she believes shouldn't exist by now. And here's the uncomfortable reframe. This isn't her chasing, it's her recalibrating. She's trying to understand why nothing has happened, not whether she wants something to happen. Men who stay composed often mistake this for teasing, or friendliness, or even impatience. But emotionally, what's happening is more precise. She's experiencing cognitive dissonance. Her internal narrative says there's chemistry. Your behavior says, I'm not acting on it. That contradiction creates tension inside her, not just you. And tension seeks resolution. Sometimes it shows up as playful disappointment, sometimes as subtle remarks like, we always have such a good time together. It's funny you haven't made a move. Notice what she doesn't say. She doesn't say, I like you, because in her mind, the signs were already there. So instead, she adjusts. Her tone shifts. Her patience shortens just slightly. And if you're observant, you'll sense something else beneath it all. She's still there, still engaging, still present. That's not indifference. That's expectation. But expectation left, unresolved, doesn't stay neutral for long. It either deepens or collapses. Before that happens, another sign usually intensifies, one that feels warm on the surface but carries pressure underneath. It's subtle, disarming, and easy to underestimate. That's what we'll talk about next. This is the sign that feels the safest, and because it feels safe, it's often dismissed, which is exactly why it works. 4. Frequent smiling or laughter. There's a difference between politeness and presence. You feel it the moment you walk into the room. Her face lights up. Not dramatically, not performative, but immediately she smiles before you finish a sentence. Laughs at jokes you didn't even mean to be funny. Finds amusement in pauses, in silence in you. And here's the shift most men never make. This isn't about humor, it's about alignment. When someone is emotionally tuned to you, their body responds before their mind intervenes. Her laughter becomes reflexive. Her smile stays a second longer than the moment requires. She looks at you when something funny happens, even if you didn't cause it. Why? Because on a psychological level, she's already placed you in the role of the person she shares moments with. And now comes the part that creates pressure, quiet pressure. Sometimes she says things like, you always make me smile. Or half joking, half testing, it's funny, how haven't you asked me out yet? Men who are self-contained often brush this off. They think she's just being nice. But niceness doesn't orient itself around one person consistently. Interest does. And here's the uncomfortable truth hiding inside her smile. She's regulating disappointment. Every laugh is also an attempt to keep the connection warm long enough for you to finally see what she's been showing. That warmth isn't infinite. It's sustained by hope. And hope, when stretched too long, starts looking for reassurance. Which is why, after the smiling, after the laughter, she often shifts into something deeper, more personal, more revealing, not because she's oversharing, but because she's checking whether emotional closeness will unlock what physical hesitation hasn't. That transition is never accidental, and once you notice it, you can't unsee it. This is where things stop feeling casual, and for men who don't rush intimacy, this is often where confusion deepens because the connection suddenly feels real but undefined. 5, she initiates meaningful conversations. Pay attention to what she asks you about, not your day, not surface-level stories. She asks about your future, your values, what you want without saying from her. Where do you see yourself in a few years? Do you believe in soulmates? What does a good relationship look like to you? These aren't idle questions. They're alignment checks. She's not gathering information out of curiosity. She's mapping compatibility. And here's the psychological turn most men miss. People don't open emotional doors unless they're hoping someone walks through them. When she shares personal stories, things she doesn't tell everyone, she's not just trusting you, she's inviting you into her inner world. Men who stay controlled often interpret this as bonding without expectation. But emotional depth creates momentum, and momentum seeks direction. Every deep conversation is her saying, without saying, "Look how well we connect here. Doesn't that deserve movement?" She might bring up love, commitment, what she wants in life, not to pressure you, but to see if you step forward or stay where you are. And when you don't move, she doesn't necessarily pull away. She leans closer. Which brings us to the next sign, because when words aren't enough, the body speaks. And it speaks softly at first. This is where intention becomes physical. Not obvious, not bold, but undeniable if you're paying attention. 6. Subtle touches that aren't random. It starts small, a brush against your arm, a high five that lingers half a day, second too long, standing closer than necessary when she speaks. At first, it feels incidental, almost forgettable, but it keeps happening. And here's the reframe that changes everything. People who are uncomfortable don't touch. People who are indifferent don't linger. Touch is the fastest way the nervous system tests safety and desire at the same time. When she finds reasons to be physically close, she's not crossing a line. She's checking whether you'll meet her there. Sometimes she even jokes, "We're always so close. Why haven't you made a move?" That's not flirting for fun. That's a release valve, because by this stage, she's already taken several emotional risks. She's isolated time, deepened conversation, sustained warmth. Touch is her final nonverbal question. And men who pride themselves on restraint often hesitate here the longest because they don't want to misread signals. But here's the uncomfortable clarity. At this point, she's not wondering if you like her. She's wondering why you won't act like it. Each subtle touch is both an invitation and a countdown, because when physical closeness goes unacknowledged, it doesn't stay neutral. It either escalates or stops entirely. Before that decision happens, one more sign often intensifies: verbal, direct, and deceptively light. That's what comes next. By now, she's done almost everything except say it outright. And that's when the compliments start landing differently. 7 compliments that aren't just compliments. You're really kind, you're smart, you have great style, you're different from most guys. On the surface, these sound harmless, encouraging, warm, but listen to the timing. They don't come when you're seeking validation. They come when things are quiet, when you're alone together, when there's space for something to happen and it doesn't. Here's the psychological layer most people never mention. Compliments at this stage aren't about boosting your confidence. They're about clarifying attraction without forcing vulnerability. She's making her approval visible. And sometimes she adds a teasing edge. "How has someone like you not asked me out yet? Any girl would be lucky to have you." Men who stay composed often hear this and think, "She's just being nice." But niceness doesn't single one person out repeatedly. Attraction does. And here's the uncomfortable shift. When compliments become frequent, they're no longer passive. They're a signal of expectation. She's telling you how she sees you, hoping you'll step into that role. Because from her perspective, the risk has already been taken. She's shown interest through time, touch, conversation, warmth. Your silence is now the loudest variable in the room, and silence, when misunderstood, doesn't read as patience. It reads as uncertainty, or worse, disinterest. That's why she often redirects her effort elsewhere, not away from you completely, but outward, which leads to the next sign, one that happens when she wants to be seen without asking to be chosen. When interest isn't acknowledged in person, it rarely disappears. It relocates quietly, strategically. 8. Social media engagement that isn't casual. Suddenly, she's the first to like your posts, the first to comment, the one who reacts within seconds, almost as if she was already there. She doesn't just write nice pic, she references something personal, something only you would understand. She sends you memes tied to inside jokes, articles about things you once mentioned in passing, messages that don't need a response but invite one. Here's the psychological reality most men underestimate. Online engagement is low risk visibility. It allows her to stay present without exposing herself again, to remind you she exists in your mental space without asking why she isn't already there. Men who don't chase attention often assume this is just friendliness, but friendliness is broad. This is targeted. She's signaling consistency. I notice you. I remember you. I'm still here. And beneath all of that is a quieter question she won't ask out loud. Are you ever going to do something with this? Social media becomes a bridge when real world momentum stalls, a way to keep the thread alive while she decides whether to keep investing, because attention without direction eventually feels exposed, and exposure when unmet doesn't stay patient forever. That's why the next sign emerges not digitally, not verbally, but situationally. She starts creating moments, not obvious ones, opportunities. And whether you recognize them determines what happens next. This is where intention stops hiding behind signals and starts shaping the environment. Not forcefully, not dramatically, precisely. 9. Creating opportunities. You're supposed to notice when a woman can't believe you haven't made a move yet. She doesn't wait passively. She arranges possibility. She lingers after conversations should have ended, finds reasons to be where you are again and again, mentions she's free on a specific night, and then goes quiet. That evening's pretty open for me. I don't really have plans this weekend. I might just stay in unless something comes up. These aren't statements, they're openings. And here's the shift that changes how you see everything. She's not hoping you'll confess feelings. She's hoping you'll recognize the doorway she's standing in front of. Men who are emotionally disciplined often miss this because they don't want to assume. They wait for certainty, but certainty doesn't come first. Recognition does. Every opportunity she creates is her lowering the barrier just a little more, making it easier for you to step forward without risk because she's already absorbed most of it. And when those opportunities pass unnoticed, something internal happens. She starts wondering if you're choosing not to see them. Not because you're afraid, but because you might not want what she wants. That's when the dynamic reaches its final threshold. The last sign isn't about hints or invitations or timing. It's about space, physical, emotional, personal. And once you understand that final signal, everything before it clicks into place, this is the last sign, not because it's the loudest, but because it's the most revealing. 10. Sharing personal space and waiting. When a woman shares space with intention, she's no longer hinting. She sits beside you when other seats are empty, leans in while talking close enough that distance would require effort, finds reasons to touch you lightly, adjusting your collar, brushing something from your shoulder. None of this is accidental. This is proximity with meaning, but there's a deeper layer most men miss. She's not just closing physical distance, she's opening emotional access. She tells you things she doesn't tell many people. Personal stories, private thoughts, small truths that require trust. This is her saying quietly, I'm already here. I've made room for you. And here's the final psychological shift. At this stage, she's no longer asking whether you like her. She's asking whether you recognize what's being offered, because space, real space, is vulnerable. And when that space goes unclaimed, it doesn't feel like patience to her. It feels like being unseen, not rejected, unrecognized. That's why this moment matters more than all the others combined. Once you understand this, the confusion dissolves. You realize something important. You weren't slow, you weren't weak, you weren't clueless. You were operating without the full picture. And once you see the pattern, you don't second guess this anymore. You don't overanalyze signals. You don't sit in uncertainty wondering what things mean. You move differently, calmly, deliberately, with awareness. Because men who understand psychology don't chase signs. They recognize invitations. And once you recognize them, silence is no longer safe. It's a choice.